The bevel capacity of the circular saw is anywhere between 0 to 45 degrees, and to use this we need to turn the base plate bevel lock in an anti-clockwise direction to loosen the angle scale. The base plate angle scale reads anywhere between 0 to 45 degrees. Tilt the base plate away from the tool until the required cutting angle is adjusted on the angle scale, and then subsequently tighten the bevel lock by turning it in a clockwise direction. Do not use the depth of cut scale when making bevel cuts due to the possible inaccuracy. Here, the bevel cut is set at 45 degrees, and you can see that the base plate is tilted away from the tool. Suffice to say, the bevel cut capacity is anywhere between 0 to 45 degrees. You can cut 0 degrees, 15 degrees, 30 degrees, and 45 degrees on the bevel, okay? So basically just undo the bevel lock anti-clockwise, toggle through the angles that, meets your bespoke requirements, then, to turn the bevel lock clockwise to secure or confirm the angle that you want to, cut through. And for the depth of cut, if we lift the lower guard lever to reveal the lower blade guard, it reveals the blade, and when we visually inspect the blade, we can see that the blade is too far out, from the base plate. And that's because we do not need all of that, blade protruding from the base plate if we're just cutting, a hardwood plywood of about 12 mil. And here you can see that, the blade protrudes from the base plate, so the depth of cut is definitely greater than 12 mil, which is the hardwood plywood's thickness that we want to cut through. To reduce the depth of cut to 12 mil or 15 mil, we lift the depth of cut lock lever and raise the saw body away from the base plate. And straight away on visual inspection, we can see that the depth of cut scale limit is up to 65 mil. So what we want to do is to set the depth of cut with the scale to about 12 mil, which is the thickness of the hardwood plywood that we want to cut, okay? Best practice would be to always add 3 mil to the depth of cut so that the blade can comfortably cut through the material. And so here I will be reducing the maximum degree from 65 to about 15 degrees. And once it's 15 degrees on the scale, I will push down the lever down to lock in position. And so basically we have set the depth of cut in line with the thickness of the hardwood plywood that we want to cut. If you don't know the thickness of the material that you want to cut, just set, the blade beside the thickness of the material directly just underneath the base plate, and then subsequently adjust the depth of cut scale accordingly. And once you have set the depth of cut, just slightly beneath the thickness of the material, push the lever down to lock the depth of cut into position. Before you proceed with this operation, make sure that you're wearing the appropriate safety glasses, an approved face mask, and ear protection. For health and safety reasons, you don't want damage to your hearing, you don't want respiratory issues, or getting carcinogens into your respiratory tract. So protect your eyes from foreign object debris. Health and safety is very important. The next step of the process would be to carry out a risk assessment with regards to slip and trips. The next step of the process would be to cut in line with the markings on the underside. Set the base plate of the working tool on the underside of the plywood, right at the lines or the markings. Get the saw blade spinning right before it engages the plywood, whilst the base plate, is sat flush on the underside of the plywood. Do not start the working tool right where the saw blade engages the wood. Always hold your saw firmly with both hands when operating. You need steady hands when trying to cut through the hardwood plywood. Your switch is locked off to prevent accidental starting. Your working tool has got a safety on and off switch. Firstly, depress the lock off button and then subsequently depress the on and off switch. After depressing the on and off switch, release your hands from the lock off button. The switch is now on from here onwards. To switch off, just release your hands from the on and off switch. The blade may continue to rotate after switching up, so just wait until the tool comes to a complete stop before setting down the work tool. Ensure that the saw blade is not in the way of the cord or wire and that you're slightly offset, from the working tool when cutting through the plywood. The most probable root cause of why the saw blade has stalled or binded is because it has deviated from its line of cut or wavered during the cutting process. Suffice to say, cutting at an angle. Or it could be that, the work tool was leaning on either side of the cut work pieces, where we were trying to make diagonal cuts, thereby cutting binding. If this happens, do not pull the work tool, from the wood piece. As earlier highlighted, just release your hands from the on and off switch. Like I said, the blade may continue to rotate after switching off. Just pretty much wait until the tool comes to a complete halt or stop before setting down, okay? After which, you can reposition, the working tool, along its line of travel or linear travel, okay, ensuring that the blade doesn't rest on the wood and it's free spinning, whilst you're trying to retrace its line of travel. You can start at, at the very initial position where you started making your diagonal cuts, or you can start off, at the position where the saw blade stalled. But if you're experiencing difficulties, from the stalled position, you can start from the initial position and retrace your line of travel, all the way through whilst making your diagonal cuts. So I will replicate the process, of cutting through your plywood when you're halfway through. So here you can see that, I'm providing enough room for the saw blade to spin, prior to cutting, halfway through the plywood. At this stage, I have ascertained that the blade isn't angled and, it's free spinning. So I'll proceed, to finish off, the cut. As I am pretty confident that the saw blade would not be latching or cutting into the sandwiched sides of the hardwood plywood. Just make sure there's enough room and it's not picking on the sides of the plywood before you proceed to finish off, your cut through the cut line. This is the first cut, and it's not an entirely smooth, fine quality cut, but at least we know what our do and don'ts are. And please do note that other less probable kickback causes could result from overheating, which causes the blade to warp, blade dullness and unguided cuts, sap build up in the blade, and lastly, incorrect blade height. So let's visually inspect, the diagonal cuts to see if we've got, fine quality cuts. And straight off, you can see that, it's not a very fine or pristine quality cut. And, there are a host of reasons why this has happened. Firstly, you can see that, the blade bent at an angle. We kind of wiggled and, we didn't accurately have a continuous cut. It wasn't a linear cut. And as such, the blade binded in the sandwiched edges of the plywood. Secondly, the blade selection isn't spot on, okay? We have selected a ripping blade here, which is much suited for ripping applications as opposed to applications for veneers like your plywood. A combination or general purpose blade would have been more suited for your hardwood plywood, as cutting or making diagonal cuts on the plywood involves ripping and cross-cutting at the same time as you cut through its line of travel. click on the link in the description or at an earlier part in the video where I kind of like discussed, blade selection with respect to your hook angle, your bevel, the number of teeth, the tooth configuration, and what blade is suited for what material. Okay. The next step of the process would be to repeat and reproduce the process, replicate the process. Now that we know exactly what we're doing to get, finer quality cuts from the ripping blade. A workman is only as good as his tools, but we're just gonna try and get, good quality cuts from the ripping blade. But if we wanted optimal quality cuts, then your combination blade or your general purpose blade, is the way to go, as they are capable of producing the finer quality cuts that you see on the side of the hardwood plywood. So we are going to make more diagonal cuts, but ensuring that our hands are sturdy, we're not deviating from the cut line or the line of cuts. We're not wiggling, we're not putting pressure of the work tool onto the material that's being supported by the poles of the rack, whilst ensuring that our saw blade spins freely before it engages the hardwood plywood, and if possible engineer a continuous cut. So the next step of the process would be to replicate and run the saw blade through each subsequent work piece line of travel. And as you can see, this is a much better cut. So we're going to replicate the process again and cut this hardwood plywood into 4 pieces diagonally, from both ends. Reclamp subsequently and replicate the process on the half cut plywood hardboard. And like I said previously, make good use of your safety lock-off button, okay, to prevent accidental starting. And when ready, press on the switch or the trigger. Make sure that the saw blade has enough room before it starts cutting through the wood. And cut linearly, continuously along its line of travel, or along the pencil mark that you've lined up on the hardwood plywood. The next step would be to rework the plywood hardwood piece where we had the binding or the kickback from the work tool. Just strip off the side to get a finer quality cut with the circular saw. And trust me, this stripped off bit is not the best looking piece on camera, but it looks a lot better, in person when you actually visually inspect, the stripped off piece. And as you can see, it's not the best looking quality cut, aesthetically, but it's better off than the binded cut that we had previously. At best, the blade has just done a slightly below par of medium cross-cutting and ripping, of the hardwood plywood. A combination or general purpose blade would have done a much better job. with respect to getting quality cuts. Once done, place the working tool on its underside. Despite the fact that we've got a lower blade guard to protect the blade, you don't, always want to be, placing a working tool, where you've got the blade, because that could damage the blade accidentally, okay? You can store the coupling away or leave it installed on the vacuum adapter, okay, provided you haven't got the hose on it. That's fine if you regularly use your circular saw, but if you don't, just store the coupling away on its own or as a standalone from the circular saw. Then subsequently disassemble the coupling from the vacuum adapter by undoing them knots. And whilst undoing them knots, if the clips on the coupling, disengage fully, bring them quite close to each other and torque tighten the screw, and the clip should get back into position. Click on the link in the description for quality blade material and tooth configuration selection in order to get quality fine cuts, as well as dust extraction, configuration or customization, how to use the power rail guide, and risk assessment when using your circular saw. And that's about it really. If you found the information useful, don't forget to subscribe, like and share, helps the channel grow, and hopefully catch up with you later. Goodbye.